For further perspective, Chen Herzog, a BDO, joins us here on the set. Thank you very much for being with us, Zephyr.
Hello.
Well, why is President Obama pushing this deal?
Well, Obama really is confident that he wants to pass this deal, and the objective is to create a force, economic force, that will create a contra to the Chinese domination in the area. Those 12 countries account for about 40% of the global trade. It's really an important economic force. Much to the same logic of the EU bloc, he wants to create an economic bloc, not as strong as the EU, but with similar economic logic.
Fascinating. Well, is the TPP more pro-consumer or pro-corporate?
You know, everybody's calling it pro-corporate, but if you look and see, the two presidential candidates, both Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders, I think the only policy issue that they both agree on is that they're against this framework. And perhaps the fact that they are both against it actually is a signal that it's in fact a well-balanced framework. And I think from the consumer point of view, everybody is calling it pro-corporate, but you have to remember that reducing of import taxes ultimately gains the consumer because he gets lower cost of living, lower cost of consumer products. Of course, if this consumer at the end of the day loses his job, then he doesn't care about the cost of living, and this is really the main concern, that people are going to lose their jobs.
Well, speaking of the consumer, let's look at one segment of the populations affected by this. How are the citizens of the underdeveloped nations affected by this partnership?
Well, the underdeveloped nations will ultimately gain from easier export and manufacturing to the US and the developed countries in this area. But there are concerns, and I think the two main concerns of these nations are, one, the effect on drug prices, because one of the issues there is enforcement of copyright and patent laws, and there is a fear that that will increase the cost of life-saving drugs and medicine. And the other issue is that the agreement calls or enables corporations to sue governments if they enact regulation that hurts investments in those areas. And there is a fear that government will not be able to enact regulation, for example, if you increase minimum wage, and then some corporation will sue you because he made investments and you hurt his financial interests. So these are the two major concerns of these countries.
Despite this deal appearing, as you say, to be balanced, why are we seeing so much grassroots protest on both sides of the Pacific?
Well, I think the protest, as I said, from the side of the U.S. economy, the fear is that it's too much pro-corporate, and there is a fear that people will lose their jobs because of exposure to cheap imports from underdeveloped countries. And from the underdeveloped countries, there is a fear that increased cost of living and regulation.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming on the set and offering this analysis to us.